sometimes it's all about how you say something, right? So, like, I was just on a canoe trip, as I mentioned, and I could have said at the end of it, I didn't shave for 5 days. I could have said it like that, or I could have said, I didn't shave for 5 days. You know, it sort of gives a whole different gist to it. Or we might say something like, oh, we're having roast beef for supper again tonight. Or we might say, we're having roast beef for supper again tonight. You know, depending on how you see roast beef. Someone who loves the city life and doesn't really get, you know, what it's like to be up here, they might say something like, oh, those guys, they live way up north in some place called Haliburton, you know, kind of with disgust and disdain. Or they might with envy say, they live way up north in some place called Haliburton, because, you know, it's ringing with intrigue and mystery for them. You get the point. Now this is how we should look, and we can look at a line in the passage of Scripture that Jan read earlier. This introduces us to some parables that Jesus gave and taught. And I think Luke sets it up this way. Luke, the gospel writer, I think he sets it up like this. So the story, once again, Jesus is eating with tax collectors and sinners. They're all gathered, it says, they were all gathered around to hear him. But the Pharisees and the teachers of the law, also known as the scribes, they muttered, you see, this man welcomes sinners and eats with them. You can sort of hear the disgust and the disdain. This man welcomes sinners and eats with them. But you could also hear this another way, couldn't you? It could be, this man welcomes sinners and eats with them. You get the difference? Yeah. So now, the word eats with them, or the concept of eating with them at this time and era when this was written, also conveyed or inferred the idea of fellowship. So hanging out with someone, it still does today, largely, unless we're, you know, both eating hot dogs and watching the baseball game or something. But even then. So it means gathering around and spending time with, becoming friends with, having fellowship with. So this window here, for instance, is from the book of Revelation. Behold, I stand at the door and knock, and if anyone hears my voice and opens the door, I will come in to him and sup with him, or eat with him, and he with me. So, and some versions say sup or have fellowship. Some just translate it straight up, and have fellowship with them. So I will come in and have fellowship with him. So this is at one and the same time the critique and the criticism of Jesus, and also it's the most wonderful proclamation we can make about him, right? This man welcomes sinners and eats with them. In fact, it kind of sums up the whole gospel, the whole thing that we're all about. That's what Jesus is all about. And that's gladsome news for us, because we are them. We are the sinners. We're the wrecked people. And Jesus welcomes us, and he comes in and he eats with us, and he has fellowship with us. So this is good news, but why did Jesus do that? You know, back in his day, obviously the Pharisees and the scribes were wondering, what is he doing? Why would he do that? And we might well ask, I mean, Jesus, he went way beyond the traditions of other rabbis of his day when he did this. And so why does Jesus do this? I'm glad you asked that question. And Jesus has 3 parables to explain it right following after this. So that happens, and then he tells them this parable, then he tells them another parable, then he tells them another parable, and they all have the same meaning. So it's something that he's really trying to press home. They're about something that's lost and gets found. We're just going to look at the first 2 today. You'll be glad to hear. And the third one we did look at, I think, back in the spring, which is the really famous, the prodigal son, or the story of the 2 sons. And one of whom is which one is it that was lost? And that is kind of the question of that one. So in this one we have the first parable is about the lost sheep. So a shepherd has 100 sheep, and one gets away on him. I don't know, it's wandered off, it's disappeared, and he's really concerned about it. And so it says he goes off to find it, and he leaves the 99 in the open country, it says. And he goes off and he looks until he finds that sheep. He's determined to find the sheep. And when he finds him, he says he puts him on his shoulders and goes home. And then he calls everybody. Everybody he can get a hold of, friends and neighbors, and says, "Rejoice with me, I've found my lost sheep." So that's the first one. Very simple, yet very powerful. So we have to understand that they probably had more of an idea of what it was to keep sheep than most of us do. And I've never kept a sheep myself, except for maybe you guys, to some degree. It's based on what I've heard or what people will tell us about what it is to take care of sheep. One thing about sheep is once they get lost or stuck somewhere off away from everybody where they're supposed to be, they can become terribly terrified. They're extremely timid creatures. And but their only defense, they really don't have, they don't have claws, they don't have teeth to speak of. One side they have teeth, I believe. So all they can do is bleat plaintively, like, they just do that. I'm pretty good. That's all they can do. And they just stay in one spot, frozen with fear, until if they're fortunate enough for someone to find them. Now, in the story, of course, there's a lot of possibilities going around the first hearers' minds when they hear this. They're thinking, okay, now, the sheep is lost. Maybe the hirelings, the shepherd, the people that work for the shepherd would go and get the sheep. But they'd be less inclined to. It's a lot of work. And as we're going to find out, it's a costly enterprise to go and find these lost sheep. It would be better to say, oh, we couldn't find it, or got eaten by bears, or something like that, right? So in the story here, it's the shepherd himself, and that would spring out to the first hearers. The shepherd himself goes out to find the sheep, and he goes far and wide, and when he finds the sheep, it says he carries him back on his shoulders. Now, I looked up what the weight of a sheep was, because I really didn't know. And, they're roughly our size. So, a newborn lamb is roughly the size of a newborn baby, 7 or 8 pounds. And then they get bigger. Now, this is where I run into problems, right? Because the ewes, they're like 100 to 150 or so. And the rams are like 200 and up, usually, right? About the size of a North American male. So at any rate, this sheep that he's finding is probably 90, 100 pounds. Let's say it's lost a bit of weight. It's been emaciated from being out in the wilderness for a few days, and it's dropped some weight. It might be 90 pounds. You ever try putting something 90 pounds across your shoulders? No. And that's quite a portage, let's just say. So, and taking it back perhaps many miles. But it says he finds it, he joyfully puts it on his shoulders and goes home. He's so happy to get the sheep. And one of the things about the story is the sheep has probably lost economic value. I mean, it's not in prime condition anymore. Right? It's not a nice fat sheep with a nice glistening, lovely coat of wool. It's probably, wool's all mucked up. It may have some injuries. It's lost weight. It's depreciated. But not in the eyes of this shepherd. He doesn't care how wrecked up it is because he loves this sheep and he's going to bring it back. So, of course, the song we just read, or sang, hopefully you were listening and reading those words as you sang it. So I love that old hymn. It's a really well-crafted, kind of interpretive song. But it takes all the aspects of this parable and kind of turns it into evangelism, if you will, but, the gospel of Christ and what he's done for us. So that's all based on this one little parable. So that's the sheep story. The coin story is a little bit different, and it adds another light to the whole idea of the lostness and God's going after us to find us. In this case, it's a woman who has lost a coin, a silver coin, or a drachma, I guess in the Greek, and it's roughly the worth of a day's wage. Now, the material that the Sunday school had to work with, they're working through the same story today, and it tells us that probably back in those days, women, when they got married, would get kind of, I don't think the right word's a crown, but like a wreath of coins, a bit like a crown or what is the word for that? Headdress? Tiara. Yeah. Tiara might be a little strong, but yeah, that kind of thing. It was made of 10 of these coins. And so it might be something they would wear often as they went about their work, perhaps. And one dropped out of the setting and got lost. So it's not just of economic or financial worth to them. It would have a sentimental value. It'd be something like losing, the ring out of your wedding ring or something. That's a stone out of your wedding ring. I guess that'd be your engagement ring. Anyway, or your wedding ring. So that's the kind of thing we're looking at here. And so the woman, she sweeps the house and she lights the lamps and she just does not stop until she finds that coin. One of the things about the coin is it does not lose value, right? Unlike the sheep. So it tells us something about value. But the other thing is that, where'd I go? Oh, it can't help you find it. The coin cannot call out to you. It cannot even so much as bleat. All the initiative for finding is on the part of the woman. The coin is there somewhere, wherever it is, and she has to find it, locate it, and bring it back to safety, if you will. And then when she does, it says, once again, she calls all her friends and all her neighbors and says, "Rejoice with me, I have found my lost coin." So that's kind of the story. And the other part of that, the second one, is quite uncharacteristic of the day, is that Jesus uses a woman and a story that would appeal to women to make his point, which is pretty darn amazing. I mean, he's way out of the cultural norm. In fact, it wasn't long after this before the Pharisees, the rabbis, were writing things about women that were not very kind, shall we say. And Jesus is actually lifting women up and putting them in an equal place with men. He's saying probably he's thinking this parable might appeal to the guys, the sheep, the whole sheep thing, because that would be a guy thing. And the woman sweeping the house looking for her silver coin probably got more appeal for women. So just that is Jesus stepping way beyond the cultural bounds of his day. Now, what is this all about? I think it's this. From God's perspective, God's trying to tell us something, or Jesus is explaining to us what God's perspective on us is. And that perspective is that we're lost, and he's going to, by golly, find us. We're all lost. And kind of a few years ago, I did a series on Romans, and a difficult series on Romans. Some of you may remember this. In Romans chapter 3, he talks about the lostness of the entire human race. He says, "We have already made the charge that Jews and Gentiles alike are all under sin. As it is written, there is no one righteous, not even one. There is no one who understands, no one who seeks God. All have turned away. They have together become worthless. There is no one who does good, not even one. Their throats are open graves. Their tongues practice deceit. The poison of vipers is on their lips. Their mouths are full of cursing and bitterness. Their feet are swift to shed blood. Ruin and misery mark their ways, and the way of peace they do not know. There is no fear of God before their eyes." Now, these are all quotes from the Psalms and from Isaiah. Now we know that whatever the law says, it says to those who are under the law, so that every mouth may be silenced and the whole world held accountable to God. And I think people wiggled and squirmed a lot in their seats when I preached on that a few years ago. So, but it's just very clearly pointing out that we're all lost. And even if we're not doing obviously bad things, we do not seek God. It's not our inclination to seek God. The way of peace, he says, the way of peace they have not known. It's quite an indictment. Now, we may be inclined to think, when we think of, who's lost? I guess, yeah, there are some lost people in the world. We may think, oh yeah, lots of the youth today. They're pretty lost. Right? It's always the youth, right, Farron? the youth are lost. Or people that are, doing drugs all the time, or alcoholics, or with various addictions, or people that are in prison. We're thinking of these extreme cases that they're the lost. And maybe for many of us, that's not the people that we're in touch with all the time. So what about the people around you? And maybe yourself? What about the people that are pretty nice people, and in fact, they've really made quite a go of life. They've succeeded. Maybe they've retired up in Halliburton, and they've got a lovely spot, and they're really friendly, and they invite you over for dinner and drinks, and they're funny and entertaining, and they're on various organizations, and they go south for a couple of months in the winter, and they seem to have it made, right? What about them? Now you see, if God actually made us and designed each one of us individually and uniquely, and loves us and longs for us and designed us and made us with this in mind, that we would actually know him and have an intimate relationship with him and get to know his ways and become like him, like a father, like children to a father. And by the way, he does. That is exactly his plan. And he longs and desires for us to actually share his life to such an extent that we become people who are just, and we're holy, and we're generous, and we're joyful, and we're humble. And we can have all these good things and all the success in the world, and if we don't have that from God's perspective, because we're not with him, encompassed in his embrace of grace and love, then we're lost. Even if we're religious and do all the right stuff and go to church, but don't carry on or have not experienced this intimate relationship with the loving God who made us and wants us for himself, then we're lost. The Westminster Catechism. Some of you good Presbyterians here will have probably studied that back in your day. Maybe. Anybody ever heard of the Westminster Catechism? It's very famous in theological circles. So the catechism, for those of you that don't remember, when you were children, some of us were young, and you go through confirmation class, they would require you to learn the catechism. And the catechism was basically set up, here's the questions, and here are the answers. And so there's been a movement away from that for some years. Now people are moving back to it a bit. The Westminster Catechism, one of the key questions was, what is the chief end of man? So, they weren't into all kind of inclusive language back in the day. So we could interpret that. What is the chief end of a human being? And the answer is this. The chief end of man is to glorify God and enjoy him forever. To glorify God and enjoy him forever. See, is that the way our world thinks? Is that what our world in general thinks its purpose is? No. So very much at odds with the way the world is and the way the world thinks. To glorify God means to bring him praise and bring him thanks, and bring him worship, and bring him glory with the way we live our lives. And then it says, not just that, but to enjoy him, to have a blast with him, to be in joy with him forever. And if that's true, and if the Westminster Catechism has got it right, and I think it does, but if it's true, and we're not there, then we are lost. Now the point of the parable is that God is like these people, like the shepherd and like the woman. That he sees us like that. He sees us way off, doing our own thing, far off from our original intended purpose, and he's on a mission to bring us back. And by golly, there's nothing that's not going to stop him. He will do whatever it takes. He will go to extraordinary lengths on this mission to bring us back to himself. That's what the cross is about. The center thing of our faith is the cross, and that's the extraordinary lengths to which God will go to bring back his own. That he would die for us and shed his life's blood for us, and be tortured for us. It helps maybe to get a grasp on the meaning of that. It's his extraordinary length, a way of searching for us and finding us. And when he finds us, it says when he finds us, there's a whole lot of rejoicing goes on. But Jesus interprets this as meaning for every sinner that repents. In the same way, he says, there's rejoicing in the presence of the angels of God over one sinner who repents. So these two things are equated in the text, which is quite interesting, actually. That God's finding of us equals us repenting, which is kind of peculiar. Think about that. It sounds more like it's something you're doing, but actually it's more something God's doing. So he's actually finding you, and when he finds you and you realize you're found, you have repented. And the thing about that is when that happens, it gives God great joy. It gladdens his heart. Gladdens God's heart. And he throws a party. And he invites all the angels, according to Jesus. He says there's more joy in heaven in the presence of the angels. There is rejoicing in the presence of the angels of God over one sinner, just one, who repents or who gets found. Now, a couple of things about all this, and I know I've said quite a bit, but Basically, I don't know where everybody's at here, what your experience in life has been. You may well be with those who sing Amazing Grace and can sing from the heart. I once was lost, but now I'm found. Was blind, but now I see. Which was based entirely on this chapter in the Bible, Luke 15. That particular is from the prodigal son story. And I hope that's the case. I mean, if it's the case, thanks be to God that you have had that experience. But my point is, many are still quite lost in this world. Quite lost from the Good Shepherd's care. And we need to be aware of that. We need to be cognizant of that. We need to, as we look around us and see how happy people seem, or how together they seem to have it, chances are they're pretty lost from God's original intention for them, to some degree. And the other thing is, you can be found, like you and I maybe have been found, and put on the trail, if you will, on the path, the narrow path, and wandered off again. Because that sure happens a lot. Happens to me. I bet it's happened to you. Sometimes it happens in really big ways. Sometimes it happens in little daily ways. But we have an awful tendency to wander off. And usually it's not us that thinks to turn around and go back. It's God that comes looking. So unless we're prayerfully, passionately, kind of cooperatively in a relationship with Jesus and involved in his mission, because it's not our mission, it's his mission to affect, to change, to bless, to love this world, and to bring it back to himself. And unless we're engaged in that with him, we're kind of lost again. Rest assured, though, that the Good Shepherd is out looking for us all the time. I just want to close by reading the hymn we just sang, again, parts of it. You don't have to read it. I'll read it to you, but you can read it. I'm going to start at the third verse. But none of the ransomed ever knew how deep were the waters crossed, nor how dark was the night that the Lord passed through ere he found his sheep that was lost. Lord, whence are those blood drops all the way that mark out the mountain's track? They were shed for one who had gone astray, ere the shepherd could bring him back. Lord, whence are thy hands so rent and torn? They're pierced tonight by many a thorn. But all through the mountains, thunder riven, and up from the rocky steep, there arose a glad cry to the gate of heaven, Rejoice, I have found my sheep. And the angels echoed around the throne, Rejoice, for the Lord brings back his own. Let us pray.